Hey guys, welcome to a special edition of A Chapter a Day. And the reason we're calling this a special edition is because of you. Due to overwhelming public demand, we've decided, this Gitch Boy, Bob, myself, we decided, you know what? Let's do one more show. Why? Well, because basically, this is Father's Day. Sunday, June the 21st is Father's Day. And believe it or not, there is a chapter in my journey of discovery through my African eyes on fatherhood. It's actually the very first chapter in the book. And we decided, you know what? Because you guys loved the series so much, you enjoyed it so much, you commented so much, we're going to give you one more read. Before I get to that, once again, thanks so much to my editors, Dr. Anyango Diambo and Oyunga Pala. They were fantastic in bringing this book to life. Thanks to Susan Wahungu Githuku and her entire team at Footprints Press. Thank you for making this possible. It's incredible. And the reactions from all of you, each and every one of you folks, has been priceless. In fact, what we want to do, because we appreciate your comments, we want you to film yourselves. Pick up a phone, record yourselves, and tell us what you think of the book. And send it to this number. 0722 515 095. If you're out of the country, that's plus 254 722 515 095. Just WhatsApp it to us. We'll put it together, we'll compile it, and we'll bring it out on a future episode. So keep tuning in, like our YouTube page, and subscribe, and we'll be bringing you as much as we can whenever we can. It's all about you, folks. If you enjoyed it, parts you didn't like about the book, parts you could have appreciated, more you could have wanted to hear, do it. In the meantime, you can buy the book easily. Online services are everywhere around this globe. First off, Prestige Bookshop in Nairobi. Go online, get in touch with Ahmed. He'll even send you the book. Also, Textbook Center. They're also online. They've been sending to folks around the world. Get in touch with them. Textbook Center online. They'll get to you and they'll send you the book. Do that, folks, and be a part of my journey of discovery as seen through my African eyes. So let's get straight to it. Chapter 1. Fatherhood. I remember this like it was yesterday, and it was literally 13 years ago. My son is almost 13 years old, and I remember this scene like it was yesterday. Take a listen. It is 8 a.m. in Johannesburg's Park Lane Clinic on the last day of July 2007. My wife, Shyla, is in the operating theater. The anesthetist is busy monitoring her blood pressure, while the gynecologist is marking out a thin line across her belly, soon to be slit with an extra sharp scalpel. Now, Shyla and I had been married at the time for 9 years, and like most childless couples, have been through countless methods trying to conceive. We had practically given up until a really good friend of mine, his name is Jimmy Monclus Maleketa, a half Spanish, half Congolese friend we had met in Lagos. By the way, Jimmy is often mistaken to be my son, but that's a story for another day. He suggested we do in vitro fertilization at a clinic in Barcelona in Spain. Now, Shyla and I had done numerous IVF tests, and all turned out unsuccessful. But Jimmy was insistent. He insisted that we go to Barcelona. It was a clinic where his father had worked, and he had a lot of contacts, and they had guaranteed literally 90% positivity. Imagine that at that time, we're in our 40s. And even though modern medicine had enabled women in their 50s and 60s to conceive, we felt that the fertility gods had passed us over. Jimmy Monclus persisted, and we agreed. Just to keep him happy, we agreed to go to Barcelona. Now, any one of you, and I'm sure there's many of you who have been through IVF, you know what it takes. It involves weeks of mixed emotions and unreasonable hope. And if unsuccessful, It can lead to depression and anger and everything from blaming everyone from the doctors to the gods. But something amazing happened in Barcelona. 2 weeks after inserting Shyla's fertilized eggs back into her womb, the pregnancy tests came back positive. Shyla was pregnant. The next 9 months were the most challenging in our lives, but the culmination was this morning, the 31st day of July 2007, in this theater room, with doctors and nurses surrounding my wife and about to usher in the miracle of miracles. I was in the theater dressed in scrubs and clasping a video camera and 2 still cameras. I'd also picked up a cell phone camera just in case the other 2 let me down. Years as a journalist had prepared me for this moment. Simply put, there was going to be no second chances at a time like this. The moment the baby is out of the mother's womb, that is it. There's no take 2. In a way, I felt a bit like that world-famous photojournalist, many of you may know him, Mohammed Mo Amin. Mo was famously referred to in the industry as 6-camera Mo, because wherever he went, he always carried several cameras strung around his neck and a couple in his hands, and he would use all of them to take pictures and sell them to different news agencies around the world. Of course, all of them exclusives. Now, as the video camera rolled from one hand, the stills camera clicked away on the other. I did not know what kind of pictures I would get in the end, but I was not taking any chances at this time. All the while, I was talking to Shyla, trying to reassure her that all would be well and the doctors were doing a great job. She hardly seemed to respond, and I was later to understand why. Apparently, when I was being scrubbed down, Shyla had received what they call a spinal tap or anesthesia, which temporarily paralyzes her from the chest down. But she had reacted to the anesthesia and her blood level had dropped, putting the baby's life at risk. For 8 excruciating minutes, oxygen flow to the body, or rather to the baby, had been cut off. By the time the gynecologist had pulled the baby out, Jamal Koinange came out, blue in color. I, of course, kept filming, not knowing what was going on, but wondering why the little guy was not screaming and yelling like babies are supposed to at birth. The pediatrician put Jamal on the adjacent table while the nurses inserted tubes to clear his nose and airway. Still, no sound, just a tiny muffle. The doctors gave him oxygen and wrapped him in a warm blanket. "He'll be fine," Dr. Miriana Lucic, the pediatrician, told us. "He's just been deprived of oxygen, but he'll be okay." Literally minutes later, Jamal was rushed into intensive care unit and immediately placed on a ventilator. All kinds of tubes were placed in his nose and mouth and a perforation made in his head. The doctors wanted to make sure he had not incurred any brain damage due to the loss of oxygen. Here was my son at last, a beautiful but pitiful sight. All 3.6 kilograms of him surrounded by premature babies, some weighing less than 2 kilograms. The nurses even joked that he had been misplaced because he looked so big and so healthy. Now, the first to arrive to see Jamal were our closest friends in Johannesburg, Jimmy and Frida Shiganga. Jimmy and I attended St. Mary's School back in Nairobi. When I was in Form 2, Jimmy was the head boy. He was a brilliant student and athlete. Jimmy, at the time, worked for the French cement giant Lafarge. We connected in Nigeria years later and again in South Africa. Frida, his wife, was every bit the fun-loving Irish woman who had traveled the length and breadth of Africa with Jimmy before finally making an honest man of him. Her first words when she saw Jamal in the incubator, quote, "I need to be this child's godmother, and I'll start by nursing him back to health." These kind words were what Shyla and I needed at this time to hear, because we had had a difficult time coming to terms with what had just happened to our newborn. The doctors tried to reassure her that this kind of occurrence was common and that Jamal was getting the best care possible. Now, the postnatal clinic at Park Lane, they insisted, was one of the best in South Africa, if not the world. This provided very little consolation for us, a couple who had waited almost a decade for this moment. Needless to say, it took another agonizing 2 weeks in the intensive care. Imagine, 2 weeks before Jamal finally recovered. It is a blessing that we chose this hospital. They had the kind of doctors and nurses one wishes could be cloned and sent around Africa to save the lives of children who make it through the entire gestation period, only to die on the delivery table. In a way, Jamal's distressing arrival was just another stage in what was already proving to be a traumatic year. Bad luck, they say, comes in threes. We go back a bit. The first bit of bad luck happened 5 months before, in February of 2007, when I had just landed back in Johannesburg after an overnight 10-hour flight from London. As customary, Shyla picked me up from the airport, and I had some television equipment that I wanted to drop off at the office before heading home. We drove down the R24 and then onto the M1 North in Johannesburg, which was the usual route I would take from the airport to the office. I turned off Empire Road and headed the 2 blocks towards Owl Street. It was a Saturday and traffic was light, a good sign, I thought, because it meant that I would quickly go into the office, deposit the equipment, and head straight home for some much needed rest. Now, as I turned into the street and parked the car in front of the building housing the bureau, suddenly from the rear view, I noticed a car had pulled up right behind, blocking us in. I didn't think much of it and told Shyla to stay in the car while I ran inside with the equipment. Now, as I opened the driver's side door, I felt something cold and metallic on my temple. I knew this sensation before in war-torn countries where child soldiers enjoyed intimidating foreign journalists by pointing guns to their heads. This time, it was happening in civilized Johannesburg and in broad daylight. This time, it was happening right here in front of my eyes. An armed robbery. "Give us everything you've got and no one will be hurt," said a young man who looked like he was barely in his 20s. I noticed that another young man had made his way over to Shyla's side of the car and had a gun pointed at her belly. I was enraged. Shyla was 4 months pregnant at the time and quite fragile. She tried to scream, but the gunman with the cold steel gun cocked it to her head and told her not to even dare utter a sound. 3 other youths in their 20s came out of their car and started unloading all the luggage and transferring it to their car. My pockets were turned inside out and everything taken. Passport, wallet, cell phones, office keys, house keys, everything they could take, they took. Shyla's cell phone also taken, a handbag with all her documents. Everything in our car was stolen. 2 laptop computers, a brand new Sony PD-175, at that time, a great camera, my briefcase, clothes, everything. It all happened in about 8 minutes. And the worst part? People were passing by, watching, not realizing that we were being robbed. Ironically, a car passed by as I had my hands up in the air with a gun in my head, pointed to my head, and someone from the car yelled, "Hey Jeff, how you doing?" Clearly, my stance was not enough to convince that person that I was not doing too well. As soon as they finished ransacking our bags, the youth ordered us back into the car, took the car keys from the ignition, and locked both my wife and I in and took off. For what seemed like an eternity, we just sat there dumbfounded by what had just happened. Shyla, understandably, was shaking like a leaf, and I was holding back tears as I tried to comfort her. Eventually, we let ourselves out and I ran into the building to inform the security guards who had been standing by watching the entire incident unfold. When I asked them if they had summoned help, one of them turned to me and said, matter-of-factly, "We thought those were your friends that you were greeting." I was baffled, livid, angry beyond words. "Do I usually greet my friends with both my hands in the air and a gun pointed to my head?" I yelled back with disbelief. I couldn't believe it. By the time the police arrived, the thieves were long gone and nothing was ever recovered. We had become the latest crime statistic in this crime-ridden city. Luckily, neither Shyla nor I were hurt in the incident, which was the most important part, and a quick visit to the hospital later that morning confirmed that the baby was unaffected. Unbelievable stuff. This is what my son came into, that kind of life. And even though we were shaken, even though we were completely terrified, after 12 days in the intensive care unit, Jamal Koinange recovered fully. Today, 13 years later, he's about to become a teenager, bubbling boy who loves the thing that teenage boys love. Football, PlayStation, Fortnite, you name it, he loves it. And we can only thank God for what I call the miracle of miracles. I know many of you have tried to conceive. Many of you have tried to have children and have not been able to, and have probably passed that stage or have reached a stage where you say, you know what, we don't care anymore. But always remember, there is hope. We waited nearly 10 years to have that one child. And I tell you, he is no doubt the joy in our lives. I thank God that I have a son that I can call my own, because I never got to know my father. And in chapter 2 of the book, it talks about what we call the early days, where I was born 30 minutes to midnight, 11:30 on January 7th, 1966. The reason I say 30 minutes to midnight, the next day, 30 minutes later, the next day was my father's birthday. He was born on January the 8th. I came in a little early. And here's something funny about our family. My mother's birthday is September the 24th. My eldest sister's birthday is September the 24th. My second sister's birthday is April the 28th. My brother's birthday is August the 28th. So in a way, my mother's thinking, she wanted her lastborn to arrive the day of her husband's birthday. But it wasn't to be. I arrived a little early, 30 minutes early. But I tell you, my mother and my father, when he heard the news, oh my God, he was overjoyed. He couldn't believe it. Because in our tradition, the firstborn is named after the father's side. The secondborn after the mother's side. The thirdborn again after the father's side. The fourthborn after the mother's side, and on and on and on. So I, being the fourthborn, was named after my mother's father, my father's father-in-law. And they were tight. They were so close. And when I came out, my father said, "This is it. My father-in-law has been born. I can go." And my mother didn't think much of it at the time. She smiled, she laughed, she said, "Oh, there's still time to have a couple more." At the time, that's what she was thinking. There was something prophetic about what my dad said at the time. And I'll tell you why. Exactly 2 months later, January 7th, 1966, 2 months later, March 7th, 1966, I write about it in the book. My dad ran a petrol station. He was actually the first African after independence to own a petrol station in Ngara area of Nairobi. It was called Koinange Petrol Station. They still call that to this very day, even though, he sold it a long time ago. It was sold long after. So he arrives at his petrol station early in the morning on March the 7th. As he steps out of the car, he collapses. His workers run up to him and they rush him to hospital. And there he is at the Aga Khan hospital. And the message goes out. Someone calls someone, who calls someone, who calls someone, who tells my mom. She rushes to the hospital. She gets there a few hours later. There he is in intensive care. He looks up. He takes a look at her. And that was it. Dies right there in intensive care unit. Note, his youngest child has just been born 2 months before. And he's got 3 other kids. Oldest, 4.5. All the way to myself, 2 months old. A man I never knew. So the funeral plans were obviously put into effect right away. Oh, here's another thing. Apparently my dad was good friends with then President Jomo Kenyatta. And the president, when he heard this, obviously, was shook up. And he insisted he needed to be at the funeral. But as state matters go, his entire week had been planned in advance and he was supposed to leave for some function somewhere out of town. It only left a little window. If he was going to be at the funeral, it left only a little window. And that window was 2 days later. So, for instance, if my dad died on a Monday, it was the Wednesday. That's the only window that was available. So everything had to be fast-tracked. Can you imagine? In an African funeral, everything had to be fast-tracked so that the president could be present at the funeral of my father. Sure enough, that's what happened. 2 days later, huge crowd gathered in Kiamba, where I grew up. The president showed up. My dad was laid to rest at the age of 43 years old, leaving his widowed wife, 28 years old, with 4 kids. Imagine on this Father's Day, what could be going through a lot of your minds. Maybe you lost a father at a young age. Maybe you were raised like me by a single parent. What could have gone through that person's mind as they raised you? We're talking back in the 60s, not now the 21st century. It was a lot harder then. Family ties weren't as great. We had just come out of independence 3 years. So it was tough. And my mother was a tough cookie. She was a headmistress at the time at a school right next to our house, which was good because it was convenient. She could walk over to school and come back and check on her kids. But those were tough times, folks. Imagine a beautiful, radiant, wonderful, smart, brilliant 20-year-old widow with 4 children to take care of. That's the kind of household I grew up in. And she was strict to the nines. If you got out of line, whack. If you did something wrong, smack. Every time, man, I tell you, this woman, on any given day, she raised us like 2 parents would because she knew this is all she had. She said, if I'm going to give you anything, it's discipline and an education. Sure enough, she took us to the best of schools out of her own sacrifice. She took us to Hospital Hill School back in the 60s and early 70s. Fantastic school. It was actually quite a new school, which was integrating Europeans, Asians, and Africans all coming together. She took us to that school initially. And then in Standard 5, I moved over to St. Mary's. My brother and I moved over to St. Mary's. My sisters by that time had gone to boarding school at Loreto Girls School, high school. So that upbringing was incredible. In that house, the 4 of us without a father. Even on this Father's Day, remember, your father may have left you, may have died when you were young, but he'll always be your father. And you owe it to him to do what it is that he would have want you to be. And we lived there. What we thought was happily ever after. It was a great time living in Kiamba. Oh, country music. This was my introduction. At a young age, Mom would play those giant, remember those 45s, the LPs, the vinyls, we call them? She would play them. And she would play artists like Jim Reeves, Charlie Pride, Don Williams, the greatest of the greatest back then. We would listen to all that music growing up in that household. We didn't have much. We were just ordinary. Yes, my mother had a car, which was fantastic. Very few people in the village had a car. And she would drive that car so daringly. Those days, there were no tarmac roads back in Kiamba. It was all mud roads. And when it rained with that Volkswagen Beetle, my goodness, she would maneuver that car like you'd never believe. She was incredible. In fact, they coined a phrase for her. They called her Kidai, as in the daring one, because she would just zoom through puddles and mud gaps and all that. And we would be sitting in the car, scared to death, but we knew that she was in control. That was my mother. That was the household we grew up in. There was one Christmas when Mom brought home 4 bicycles. She worked, after being a headmistress, she worked at a charity organization called the National Christian Council of Kenya, NCCK, back in the day. And she would she was like in charge of all household and reintegrating foreigners who came here working for the outfit, working for the NGO. One Christmas, she brought home 4 bicycles. 4 for the 4 of us. And it was like manna had come from heaven. It was like a gift from heaven. Bicycles, which we could use. Nobody had a bicycle in the village. So we were like kings riding around it. And Mom warned us, she said, don't let anybody ride your bikes. Don't. If you do, these things will be spoiled. And we would ride and we would be proud of ourselves riding the bikes around the village. One day I decided, you know what? Because we had friends. We always had to have friends, and we were playing with little friends in the village. And I lent my bike to one of the guys. Sure enough, he got on the bike, cycled a couple of steps, boom, smacked into a tree. My bike was all banged up. The tire was all burst and all knotted up. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know, do I go and tell my mother that I just crashed the bike that she warned us not to give to anyone? So here was my thinking. Next to Kiamba was Banana Hill. That was the biggest town next door. And we knew there were welders there, welders who could weld metal parts together. And one time I had this idea. I said, you know what? There's an old stove we have. If I lit up that stove hot enough to be able to weld the metal on my bike, maybe I could restore it, because she wasn't going to go get it fixed. This was my punishment. You gave your bike away. That's your problem. So I said, okay, let me try and fix it. So there was this old stove. I put some sticks in the stove. I lit it. Unfortunately, as the stove gathered heat, I forgot that it was next to our hedge. And our hedge was made of that coniferous bushes. And as the stove lit, so did the hedge. And all of a sudden, there was a huge fire. Our hedge had caught on fire. Villagers ran from all over the place, trying to put out the fire, And I tell you, I was shocked to the bone. I couldn't even move. I was so shocked to numbness. In the meantime, my mother, who had been inside the house, came out when she heard the commotion. And I tell you, I'll never forget that scene. She looked at me, she looked at the fire, she looked at the crowd, and she fainted. Oh, God. She fainted right there in front of everyone. It was unbelievable. So now the attention goes from the fire to this woman who has fainted. It was like, oh, what have I done? I couldn't believe it. I thought, now I'm dead. All the punishment we get for other things that we've done, this one will be the ultimate. I am dead. Several hours later, after Mom had recovered, nothing was ever discussed about the incident. As much as I tried to apologize, to say sorry, to say I don't know what overcame, she never said a word. And sometimes that's even worse punishment when, it's maybe been delayed, maybe it's been deferred to another time. But my goodness, every day I would wake up and I'd say, is this the day? Is this the day? Is this the day? And for years, there was a big hole in our hedge. We couldn't grow that hedge back up again to what it was before. A constant reminder to me that recklessness sometimes could lead to such incidents. Recklessness. And it was a lesson. To this day, I think back and the hairs on the back of my neck go up and I say, oh my God, what was I thinking? But it was part of growing up. And mom knew that. And she knew she wasn't a perfect parent. And she knew she was doing the job of two parents. And she knew these kids, they're just kids. And they just want to be kids. And that's the same with you guys out there. You may have little kids. You may have troublesome kids. You may have kids who are out of control. You may want to just, get rid of these kids. I tell you, everybody has a gift. Everybody is special. That's why we're in this world. We're not here just for the sake of it. We're here because we were meant to be here. All you fathers out there, all you fathers, think about that for a moment. Your kids, wherever they are, reach out because they're there for a reason. All you mothers acting for the absentee fathers, we're thankful and grateful to you. All those mothers who have raised their kids single-handedly, we're grateful to you. And fathers who have raised their kids single-handedly, we appreciate the work you've done. Every one of you are here for a reason. Every one of you are here because you were meant to be. And those kids there, they're going to be something special one day. Believe me when I say this, because I am a product of that. The last born in a family of 4. Where were we going to go? What are we going to do? What are we going to become? You become what you want to become. That's the bottom. Nobody can ever tell you otherwise, because the gift is far greater than anybody. If you believe you want to be this, you will be that. My son right now, he says he wants to be the next Lionel Messi. Who am I to stop him? He's got the skills, he's got the heart, he's got everything it takes. Who's to stop him? It's not like when we were growing up, we were told either you be a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, an engineer. Those were the choices back in our day. If you're anything else, you are useless. Not now, folks. The times have changed. People have changed. Jobs and occupations have changed. Whatever your kid wants to be, let them be. That is their gift that comes from way, way, way above. By the way, a bit more about growing up. There was a church right next to our house, right next to the school where mom was headmistress. It was called it's still there, St. John's Church in Kiamba. But mom never wanted us to go to that church. For some reason, she says, you know what? Let's go outside a bit. So she would drive us every Sunday to Baptist Church. That's right. Baptist Church, by Ngong Road, opposite the mortuary. That's where Baptist Church was. A lot smaller than it is today. Tiny little church there. Mom would go to the main church. We would go to Sunday school. And that was our Sunday. But the best part of it, after church, mom would drive us in her Volkswagen Beetle down to Koinange Street, no less. And there was an ice cream parlor over there called Snow Cream. I don't know if you guys ever been there. If you haven't, you must. If you have, you must know it. The best ice cream they ever made was at Snow Cream. We'd park the car there, go in, order ourselves. We had a choice of either chocolate sprinkles or colored sprinkles on the ice cream. And we would just lick that all the way home, and that'll be our treat. Once a month, at the end of the month, obviously, mom would take us from Snow Cream. We'd drive around the corner. There was this chicken shop. It's still there. Kenchik, opposite Jivanji Gardens. And she would order us chicken and sausage and chips, get it wrapped up in a newspaper. You know what I'm talking about. I know many of you do. Wrapped up in a newspaper. It was nice and hot and oily and salty and everything. So we would have the chips and the chicken and the sausage in the Beetle and the ice cream in one hand, and we'll be just eating all the way home. It was like a treat like you'd never imagine. It's the little things, folks. It's the little things that matter. And to this day, every time I pass by Jivanji Gardens, I look across and I say, wow, still going strong. You see the chicken in the window on the rotisserie, still going round, and you say, I grew up on that stuff. Go round the corner to Snow Cream on Koinange Street. Snow Cream. With the pictures, they had the pictures on the wall on the kind of ice cream you wanted, whether it was, chocolate dip or whatever, special Sunday ice cream. It was all pictures on the wall. And every time we go and put, yeah, I want that. Oh, that's the one I want. Oh, that's the one I want. Oh, I tell you, growing up was a joy. Yes, we had problems, but Mom made sure that the problem she was going through didn't transcend to us. They weren't translated down to us. She made our life as perfect as possible. That's what mothers are for. That is what fathers are for. That's why there's dedicate special days to mothers and fathers. That's why we do what we do, folks. Not for us. The reason we do what we do is for the next generation. Remember that. It is never about you. It's about those who will come after you and those who will come after them. That's what life is all about. If you stop thinking about yourself and think about that other person, the next generation, and the generation after that, then you will realize that life is for the living. I could talk on and on and on about my days growing up, folks, but you have to read it in the book. Oh, by the way, yeah, we had a TV back home. We had a TV. One of the very few, probably the only one in the entire village of Kiamba. And the programs back then, you will not believe, because many of you would never, don't remember these. But remember, some of you may remember Barnaby Jones? Remember? And there was Perry Mason, Ironside, Kojak. There was the Jeffersons. There was Dallas, Falcon Crest, Bonanza. Goodness gracious me, how time has flown. The Waltons. Oh my God, every Saturday. And there was another series called Little House on the Prairie. Oh my goodness. We all watched that on a black and white TV. What an amazing. It was so good growing up at that time. And then there's one story I have to tell you. You will love this story. The first time I ever got on a plane. This was long before Pan Am. Remember we talked about the chapter on Pan Am? Long before that. So we had a very good family friend of ours. His name is Jenga Karume. Many of you know him, remember him. He was a former MP for Kiamba. He was former minister, very wealthy businessman who literally pulled himself up from his bootstraps. He started off as a charcoal seller, way back during the emergency in the 50s, as a charcoal seller. And from there, he picked himself up and rose up the chain to a wealthy businessman. A fantastic guy, by the way. If you ever met him and you had an appointment with him, he never wrote anything down. Everything was in his head. If he told you, show up Monday at 7:10 a.m., you'd be there because he'd be waiting for you. If you showed up at 7:15, he'd tell you, hey, you're late. I have another appointment coming. He would remember that every single time. So one time, Jenga Kurume and my dad were business partners in Kiambu back in the early 60s, right after independence. They had a liquor store and a cigarette distribution center in Kiambu. So they were good friends, and the Karumes were good family friends. So he calls my mom one day. I think I'm about 8 years old or so, 9 years old. He says, look, we have a house in Diani in Mombasa. Every Christmas we go there with our family. This Christmas would like you to join us. We had been to Mombasa before and loved it, staying in Nyali before. This time we were going first time to Diani in the South Coast. And he said, oh, by the way, I don't want you to take the train or drive to Mombasa. I'm going to get you all tickets. Fly down to Mombasa, we'll pick you up and come spend Christmas with us. Goodness, you can imagine getting on a flight to Mombasa, getting on a flight, period. So we got this news about a week before it was going to happen. I started packing right away. I started packing my bag. I wanted to be ready for this vacation of a lifetime. But here's the deal. Every evening, I would take my pajamas out of the suitcase. I'd put them on, go to sleep. In the morning, I wake up, pack the pajamas back in the suitcase. I just didn't want to forget anything. I wanted to be ready for this trip. And God, the excitement, getting on a plane. So sure enough, and I was praying every day. I was praying, please do not delay this flight. Lord, please, whatever you do not delay this flight or this day in any way, because I will be devastated. So sure enough, the day comes. Get up early to the airport. There's the flight. Those days, it was a Fokker 28. Fokker Friendship, they called it. FK28. There we are in the waiting lounge, waiting for our names to be called or the flight to be called. The flight is called. We get on the plane. The excitement. My God, we're going to be in Mombasa in 1 hour. We're going to be hanging out with these great folks. Get in the plane. Pick a window seat. I say, I want to see my way all the way to Mombasa. I have to watch all the way where we're going. Grab a window seat. And there I am. I sit down. The rest of the family, Mom, Shiro, Wangoi, Koinange, we all sit down. Buckle our seatbelts. We listen to the announcements. And the plane is on the runway taking off. That's the last thing I remember. That's the very last thing I remember. Until I was woken up in Mombasa by the flight attendant saying, hey, young man, you've landed. And I looked at my brother and I said, Allah, what happened? He says, yeah. You must have been excited all week long. And it was true. I hardly slept. And getting into the flight, boom. Oh my God, it was incredible. Needless to say, we spent such a great time at the Karumes. You know, he had 2 wives at that time. It was Wadiara and Jerry. Fantastic women. They treated us like their family. And the kids, Shiro and Mokuhe and Waireri and the late Joroge and Kigera and Sammy, they were all there. And they were, oh my God, fantastic week. It was like family. They were great friends. I mean, they were wealthy. They were filthy rich. But they accepted us and we spent such a great time together. Those are the memories of childhood, the little things you remember. And by the way, they're all here. They're all here in this book. Pick it up. Pick it up if you can, because some of the things I read right now, they're coming back to me like it happened yesterday. Oh, it's a joy. It's a joy. This is what I call my journey of discovery as seen through my African eyes. Pick it up, folks. Get in touch with Prestige Bookshop in Nairobi. Ask for Ahmed. He'll hook you up and he'll ship, as will Textbook Center. They've been doing a great job shipping books. Ask for Elvis. He'll get this book to you. And let's keep reading. And let's get your reactions when you read this book, folks. Maybe you want to write a book. Maybe you have a similar story. Maybe you have an even better story. Why not? Do it. Do it for the sake, like I said earlier, not for your sake, for the sake of your children and their children after that. Those who come after us are the ones who will be reading these stories and saying, yes, I can be that, or I can be better than that. This has been a special edition of A Chapter a Day, my journey of discovery as seen through my African eyes. God bless you all.